I'm Leon, and I'm going to talk about our analysis of connection-oriented DNS. So it's a joint work with our colleagues at VeriSign and also USC ISI. So DNS is very important. So it maps a name to an IP address, and it's perfect for UDP because it's a simple request-response protocol. However, DNS over UDP is actually vulnerable to amplification attack and also denial of service attack. And also there's no privacy at all because queries and responses are just sending in clear text. So here we propose to use TCP to solve the subgrouping problem, and we also propose to use TLS to provide the privacy. So TCP and TLS are not new at all, and however, our key contribution is prove they actually can work. They can actually work acceptably in the real world with a careful implementation and a very small protocol tweak. So now let's take a look at more details about the problem we have mentioned before. So there are really three kinds of threats. The first one is denial of service attack. So for denial of service attack, there are really two kinds of attackers. So the first one is amplification. So where an attacker can send spoofed queries to a DNS server and use DNS server to attack others. And the other attack is just denial of service denial of service attack to the server itself. And here we want to deal with both of these problems. And TCP TCP has well understood the technique to deal better with denial of service attack. For example, the three handshake can actually prevent spoofing. The second threat is eavesdropping. So actually there is no privacy over the wide area network. And if you are using public DNS right now, so actually your queries are now have already been exposed to the public, and also there's no privacy. And also DNS is not just about IPs, and there are some other services which actually using DNS. So for example, checking for spam. So that kind of information should be private as well. The third threat is weak crypto choices. So for a long time, the policy decision is actually driven by the UDP packet size. For example, there was a discussion about how large a DNSSEC key should be. And it's not acceptable to use a smaller key with less security, but just because of the packet size limit. And also a very large UDP packet will cause IP fragmentation, which is bad because it will cause fragmentation attack. And also more importantly, how analysis shows that the packet overflow already happens, and even more with the key rollover where you have two keys in one single packet. So to have the privacy, we have to change the protocol. Our goal is to just do as minimum change as possible, so it can be deployed easily. So the implication is just to use TLS and start TLS. To start TLS, a client can just send a very So the client can send a very special dummy query to the server. And if the server confirms it, and then the client can initiate a TLS connection. And then all the queries and responses are now private. So from our point of view, it's good because we don't have a new port. However, we do have extra RTTs. So here we must do some optimization. So to make TCP performance actually approaches UDP for DNS, we have to find a bunch of implementation choices to make. And the first one is connection reuse. So we can see from here, a new connection is very expensive. And here we see that we have 4 extra RTTs for the connection setup. And also if we can just reduce a connection, we don't have extra RTT at all. And also if a server cannot do that, we want to push the connection state to the client and let the client have tiny information to just restart the connection quickly. And here the connection restart will require 2 extra RTT. However, it is still better than a new connection with 4 extra RTTs. So the second implementation choice is query pipelining. So here by default you have a TCP connection and you send a query and you get a response and you send another query. So actually it's not efficient because there is 1 extra RTT. So here it's very important to send multiple queries at the same time. So the RTT are actually overlapped, so we don't have extra RTTs. So query pipelining matters because currently most of the web page have multiple names. So you have to often resolve multiple names at the same time. And the final implementation choices is out of order processing. So currently by default all the server implementation will process the query. So we'll process the query in order for TCP connections. So if a server gets multiple queries, and so the server will process the query in order. And it causes the same RTT problems as we talked about before. So here it's very important to let the server process the query in parallel, and also send the response back, and also send the response back out of order. So out of order processing matters because it helps to avoid head of line blocking. So actually the protocol change is minimum, but our key contribution is the performance analysis. And there are a bunch of different aspects of cost, and we have already studied all of them, and they are actually acceptable. And so however, in this talk I will only talk about the server memory and the recursive to authoritative latency, and all the other analysis is actually in our paper. So before we get to the server memory analysis, so here we have to understand how effective the connection reuse is. So the question is, how often do we see a connection is getting reused at the server side as a function of how long we keep the connection open? So here we use 3 different kind of traces to do the trace replay, and And here we find out that with our suggested timeout, so the connection reuse is actually very high. So it's about 90% and above. So the connection reuse is very important. So the connection reuse is very helpful. However, but how much does the connection reuse cost on the server side? So here we use three different. So here we use the same trace to do the analysis of the server side memory consumption. And here we find out that so the server will only require 4 to 8 gigabyte memory, and is well within current hardware. So the connection reuse is not too costly. So here we have already seen the server memory. So how about the client side latency? So here let's take a look at the recursive to authoritative latency. So here we send a bunch of names to an authoritative server, and we find out that a new connection is very expensive, and the extra RTTs are actually exactly as predicted as the extra as the cost for the connection setup we have talked about before. And also we see that a connection reuse really helps, and it can reduce the cost of the connection setup. So the previous slides only shows one part of the one part of the overall performance. So the only thing the client cares about is end-to-end latency. So however, to do the control experiment for the end-to-end performance analysis is a little complicated because there are too many factors. And for example, there are all kinds of different RTTs everywhere. So here we just decided to do the modeling for the average value. And here is our end-to-end performance result. And the baseline is just to use UDP everywhere. And as we so it's the most left group of bars. And we also study all the combinations. And so actually there is always a trade-off between how much security and privacy you want and how much overhead you want to pay. So here our recommendation is to use TLS from stub to recursive, and to use TCP from recursive to authoritative, so that we can get reasonably good privacy and security, but only have 20 to 30% slower in the overall performance. So here we already got the privacy. So how about the security? So the question is, in terms of how much resources are needed to fill out a server, does TCP really win? So here, to understand that question, we did a controlled experiment to study different attack scenarios. And here are the experiments we did, and I'm going to talk about the first two experiments. And the third experiment is actually in our paper. So the first experiment is about suburban UDP attack. So here we have a bunch of attackers, and they are sending suburban UDP queries to our server. And we also have some real queries as foreground traffic. And so here the server has to process all the approved UDP queries, so that it leads to 100% CPU usage when the attack rate is high. And also here, we only use 2 attacks to actually take down this server. So the key point here, is, so it's very easy to do the sprued UDP attack, and also it also forces to add more and more capacity. So actually, it is bad. So to compare TCP performance with UDP, we also did the sprued TCP sync flood attack. And here, compared to the horrible performance without the sync cookies, so the sync cookie can actually help the server tolerate all the spruivers. So the server has more capacity for the real queries. So the key point here is, so that it's very hard to do the sprued TCP sync flood with sync cookie on. And also our analysis shows that for the non-sprued TCP attack, a single server can actually tolerate thousands of attackers. So here the conclusion is TCP can deal better with attack than UDP. To conclude, so it's very important to use TLS and TCP to improve the privacy and the security of DNS. And our key result shows that the overall performance is actually reasonable. And also you are welcome to join our discussion at IETF, and also please try TDNS and also give us feedback.
We have time for questions. I have a question. If so, are you planning to use TLS also to guarantee the to replace DNSSEC, or are you doing DNSSEC inside?
So actually, we propose to use DNSSEC to do the authentication.
And TLS just for opportunistic encryption?
Yeah.
We have time for further questions.
Rick Andrews, Symantec. Can you talk a little bit about the certificates that the DNS server would have? Who would they be signed by? Why would I trust them? I think your paper talks about tying it to Dane, but it seems like there's a circular argument there.
So the question is about
The trust model. You're proposing TLS on the DNS server side.
Sure.
And that's, in most cases, there's a certificate there.
Yeah.
And on the web today, those certificates are signed by public CAs like
Yeah.
Symantec.
Yeah.
Would that be the case here, or would those be self-signed certificates that are bootstrapped through Dane, or what is your proposal?
So actually, the 2 options are actually work with our system. So you can either choose to use Dane to do the certificate validation, or use the regular certificate.